Welcome back to Revenge Silent.
Let's hear a story today from Concord, New Hampshire. Don't you ever dare to come back here again because this family home no longer has any room for a pathetic parasite like you. My own sister screamed those words at me while throwing a heavy black trash bag right at my feet, and she slammed the oak door in my face before I could even find my voice to respond. I stood there on the porch in the middle of a freezing Christmas night in Concord with my entire life shattered at 32 years old, realizing that I had been betrayed by the person I trusted most in this world. My name is Chelsea, and until that moment I believed that blood was thicker than anything, but the reality was far more brutal than the icy New Hampshire wind biting at my skin. Everything changed when I finally gathered the strength to open that tattered plastic bag under the dim glow of a street lamp, expecting to find nothing but old clothes and useless junk from my room. Instead, my hands began to tremble violently as I pulled out a hidden savings account book showing a balance of exactly $900,000, along with a handwritten note from my late mother that revealed a terrifying truth. Those few pages contained evidence of a criminal forgery that would eventually send my sister to prison for 3 long years. But before I tell you how I reclaimed my dignity, I need to ask you something important. Have you ever been discarded by your own family only to discover that you held the power to destroy them all along? Tell me with a simple yes or no in the comments, because you will need that perspective to understand the shocking confrontation that was about to unfold. Concord in the final days of the year always carries a gentle sadness that constantly reminds me of the vibrant times when Mom was still healthy and the house was filled with warmth. For nearly 5 years, I put my own life as a freelance artist on a complete standstill because caring for my ailing mother became my only priority and my entire world. While my peers were building careers or traveling the world, I was navigating the quiet halls of our family home, managing medication schedules, and finding solace in the small smiles Mom gave me during her brief moments of clarity. I never viewed my sacrifice as a burden, because the bond we shared was forged in those long nights of whispered stories, yet my dedication seemed to go unnoticed by those who should have cared the most. A few days after the funeral, my best friend Andrea stopped by with a tray of lasagna and a look of deep concern etched across her face as she took in my hollow eyes and trembling hands. She sat me down in the kitchen and told me that I looked like a ghost of my former self, warning me to stay vigilant because she had noticed how Brooke was already eyeing the mahogany furniture like a vulture. Chelsea, you need to wake up and protect yourself because I saw Brooke and Logan whispering in the hallway about property values before the casket was even lowered, Andrea said while gripping my hand firmly to snap me out of my grief-induced haze. I wanted to believe her suspicions were merely fueled by overprotectiveness, but a cold knot of anxiety began to form in my stomach as I recalled the events of the previous month. Throughout the final stages of Mom's illness, my sister Brooke and her husband Logan were nothing more than occasional visitors who seemed more annoyed by the hospital bed in the living room than saddened by the tragedy unfolding. They would breeze into the house once every few weeks, offering empty platitudes, before inevitably steering the conversation toward the location of the house deed or the status of Mom's life insurance policy. Logan once had the audacity to ask me if the roof had been inspected recently while Mom was resting just a few feet away, proving that his mind was already calculating the resale value of our childhood sanctuary. Their presence never brought comfort. Instead, it felt like a countdown to a transition they were eagerly anticipating, while I was desperately praying for just one more day with my mother. In one of our final private moments together, Mom pulled me close and placed a frail hand over mine, her voice barely a whisper, but her eyes burning with an urgency that I didn't fully understand at the time. She told me that she had observed the hungry looks in Brooke's eyes and warned me that some people allow greed to swallow their humanity until there is nothing left but shadows. My sweet Chelsea, I have made certain arrangements to ensure you are never truly alone, so look for the things that others might consider worthless when the storm finally arrives. she murmured with a knowing smile that lingered in my mind long after she had closed her eyes for the last time. Those cryptic words felt like a riddle from a woman who knew her family better than they knew themselves, and I realized she was preparing me for a battle that hadn't even begun yet. The initial cracks in our sibling bond became impossible to ignore when Brooke started openly criticizing the state of the house, calling it a crumbling relic that was draining our potential inheritance with every passing day. She would walk through the rooms I had meticulously cleaned, pointing out the outdated wallpaper or the squeaky floorboards while mentioning how much a developer would pay for a lot of this size in the heart of Concord. When I told her that I planned to keep the house as a tribute to our parents, she simply laughed and reminded me that my artistic sentimentality wouldn't pay the rising property taxes or the maintenance costs. You are being incredibly selfish by clinging to this pile of bricks when we could all move on with a significant payout. Brooke snapped during a particularly tense dinner, her voice dripping with a newfound venom that made me realize our relationship was officially over. Although I am no longer a naive girl and have reached an age where I should expect the complexities of life, seeing such blatant malice from my own flesh and blood felt like a fresh wound that refused to heal. 2 weeks after Mom passed away, the atmosphere inside our ancestral home in Concord became so suffocating that I often found myself gasping for air in the very rooms where I had once felt safest. The house was no longer a sanctuary of shared memories, but rather a battlefield where Brooke openly declared that I had no legal or moral right to occupy such a large property all by myself. She paced through the hallways with a clipboard in hand, acting as if she were a landlord inspecting a delinquent tenant, rather than a sister sharing a moment of collective mourning with her only sibling. Every time I tried to mention our parents' legacy, Brooke would shut me down with a cold glare, making it clear that my years of devotion to Mom's care earned me zero credit in her new financial world order. The tension finally exploded during a rainy Tuesday afternoon when Brooke stood in the center of the living room and threw her hands up in exasperation at my refusal to discuss moving out. How long exactly do you plan on clinging to this rotting corpse of a house while I am sitting here desperately needing liquid capital for my own investments? She sneered, her voice echoing off the walls that had once vibrated with Mom's laughter. I stared at her in disbelief, shocked that she could refer to our childhood home in such a derogatory way, but she simply rolled her eyes and signaled for Logan to step forward. Logan approached me with a thick stack of legal documents, his face masked in a false expression of professional concern that made my skin crawl with an instinctive sense of danger. He shoved a gold pen toward me and insisted that I needed to sign everything immediately to formalize the estate tax procedures before the state intervened and seized our assets. Chelsea, stop being so difficult and just sign these papers so we can protect what little value is left in this property before the taxes eat us alive, Logan urged while leaning over me with an intimidating shadow. I felt a wave of nausea as I looked at the dense legalese on the pages, noticing that several sections were partially obscured by sticky notes, which only deepened my growing suspicion that this wasn't about taxes at all. When I asked for a few days to have my own lawyer review the documents, Brooke's face turned a deep shade of crimson, and she accused me of being paranoid and ungrateful for all the help they were providing. She snatched the folder back from Logan's hands and warned me that my stubbornness would lead to our collective ruin. Yet her desperation only served as a warning sign that I was being lured into a trap. The situation took a more invasive turn when Brooke decided to take matters into her own hands by hiring a group of professional estate appraisers to enter the house without my prior consent. I returned from a short walk one afternoon to find strangers rummaging through Mom's private vanity and tagging her antique jewelry with yellow price stickers as if they were common garage sale items. When I confronted Brooke about this violation of privacy, I discovered that she had already changed the locks on the attic and the basement storage rooms, where all of our family's most precious heirlooms were kept. I am the executor of this family's future, so I will decide what stays and what goes, without needing permission from a sister who has no sense of reality. she stated flatly while pocketing the new keys. I stood in the hallway feeling like a trespasser in the very house where I had taken my first steps, realizing that the sister I once knew had been completely replaced by a ruthless stranger driven by cold, hard cash. As the days blurred into a cycle of harassment, I began to notice Logan and Brooke huddled in a kitchen late at night, engaging in hushed, urgent phone calls with unidentified real estate brokers. They would suddenly stop talking the moment I entered the room, shifting their gazes to their phones with a forced casualness that was incredibly poorly executed. I once overheard Logan mentioning a quick closing and a wire transfer, while Brooke nodded frantically, her face illuminated by the predatory glow of her laptop screen as she scrolled through luxury apartment listings. These clandestine meetings and secret negotiations were clear signals that a crime was being orchestrated right under my nose, even if I didn't yet have the proof to stop them. My heart ached with the realization that my own flesh and blood were treating our mother's passing as a business opportunity, and I knew that the storm Mom had warned me about was finally breaking over my head. Christmas Eve that year brought no miracles or warmth to our home in Concord. Instead, it served as the backdrop for an act of cruelty so profound that it shattered the last remnants of my faith in family. While the rest of the neighborhood was glowing with festive lights and the sound of carols, I was in the kitchen trying to prepare a modest dinner as a way to honor the first holiday without Mom. The smell of cinnamon and roasted chicken was beginning to fill the air when Brooke and Logan burst through the front door, their faces devoid of any holiday spirit, and their eyes fixed on me with a terrifyingly cold resolve. They didn't come to share a meal or offer a hug. They came with a manila envelope that represented the final blow to my existence in that house. Brooke didn't even take off her coat before she announced that the deal was finalized and that our childhood home officially belonged to a development corporation as of 4 o'clock that afternoon. I stood frozen with a serving spoon still in my hand, my brain struggling to process how a sale could have happened without my consent or even my knowledge. Logan stepped toward me with a smirk that felt like a physical assault, tossing a copy of a closing statement onto the flour-dusted counter with a sickening thud. The new owners are taking possession at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, so you had better start packing your pathetic little art supplies and get out of here tonight, he said with a chilling lack of emotion. I lunged for the papers, my eyes scanning the signature lines until I saw my own name written in a cursive that looked almost exactly like mine, but I knew with absolute certainty that I had never touched that document. When I screamed that this was a blatant forgery and that I would call the police, Logan's face twisted into a mask of pure malice, and he shoved me backward so hard that I lost my footing. I fell against the kitchen island, the air leaving my lungs as I hit the floor, while Brooke stood by and watched with her arms crossed, offering no help and showing no remorse for the violence her husband had just committed. Don't you dare play the victim with us after you've spent years living off Mom's pension while we did the real work of managing this family's future. Brooke spat, her voice cutting through the silence of the room like a serrated blade. She walked over to the hallway closet and pulled out a large black industrial trash bag that she had evidently prepared in advance for this very moment. I watched in a dazed horror as she began grabbing my precious leather-bound restoration books and the old journals Mom had kept for decades, stuffing them into the plastic bag with zero regard for their fragility. I tried to scramble up from the floor to stop her, but Logan blocked my path, his hand gripping my shoulder with a force that promised more pain if I dared to interfere with their cleaning process. They were moving with a frantic, desperate energy as if they needed to erase my presence from the house before the sun rose on Christmas morning. The humiliation reached its peak when Brooke dragged the heavy bag toward the front door and beckoned for me to follow her out into the biting New Hampshire cold. She stood on the porch, the festive wreath Mom had made years ago hanging right behind her head, and she swung the trash bag with all her might into the deep snowdrift on the lawn. Take your trash and get out of our lives for good, Chelsea, because you are officially a trespasser on private property now. She screamed, her voice echoing through the quiet street and likely reaching the ears of our celebrating neighbors. The oak door slammed shut with a finality that felt like a coffin being nailed, and I heard the heavy deadbolt click into place, locking me out of the only home I had ever known. I stood there in my thin sweater, my breath hitching in the freezing air, looking back at the house that was still shimmering with Christmas lights, but had now become a fortress of betrayal. The silence of Concord at midnight was deafening as I waded through the snow to retrieve the black bag, my fingers already beginning to go numb from the sub-zero temperatures. I looked up at the windows of the second floor, seeing the shadows of Brooke and Logan moving about, probably already celebrating their newfound wealth with a bottle of Mom's expensive wine. The sheer injustice of it all burned hotter than the cold biting at my skin, and for a moment the overwhelming urge to give up almost took hold of me. But then I felt a strange surge of adrenaline as I remembered Mom's whispered warning about the storm and her advice to look for value in what others discarded. I reached into my pocket, wiped the freezing tears from my cheeks with a shaking hand, and made a silent vow to my parents and to myself. This wasn't the end of my story. It was merely the beginning of a pursuit for truth that would not stop until Brooke and Logan paid for every second of this nightmare. By 2 hours after leaving my home, I found shelter at a desolate gas station on the outskirts of Concord, finally away from the immediate sight of the house that was no longer mine. My hands were stiff from the biting cold, forcing me to use my teeth to tear at the stubborn plastic knot Brooke had tied with such haste and malice. I expected to find nothing but ruined scraps of my past, but as the bag gave way, the familiar scent of old parchment and beeswax drifted out into the small neon-lit corner. Brooke had been so blinded by her arrogance and her desperate urge to discard me that she hadn't even checked what she was throwing away. She had inadvertently handed me Mom's most cherished collection of antique book restoration journals, the very volumes my mother had spent her life protecting from the world. I sat on the cold concrete floor, cradling the worn leather covers and feeling a strange sense of comfort, as if Mom were sitting right there beside me in the silence. As I began to leaf through the pages of a 19th century ledger Mom had painstakingly restored, a small navy blue booklet slipped out from a hidden pocket in the back cover. My breath hitched when I realized it was a savings account passbook issued by a private wealth management firm in Boston, and my name was listed as the sole owner. With trembling fingers, I flipped to the most recent transaction page and felt my heart stop when I saw a balance of exactly $900,000. This was a carefully guarded fortune that Mom had built over decades, hidden away from the prying, greedy eyes of Brooke and Logan. I stared at the numbers until they blurred, realizing that while I was being treated like a destitute beggar, I was actually carrying the capital needed to dismantle my sister's world. Tucked behind the passbook was a folded piece of stationery that still smelled faintly of the lavender perfume Mom always wore during her final days. Her elegant, steady handwriting filled the page, and as I began to read, her voice echoed in my mind with a clarity that made the hairs on my arms stand up. My dearest Chelsea, if you are reading this, it means Brooke has finally allowed her greed to swallow the last of her humanity. The letter began. Mom explained that she had discovered Brooke and Logan were drowning in massive gambling debts from illegal sports betting and had been siphoning money from our family accounts. She knew that Brooke would never forgive my honesty or my devotion to our history, so she had spent her final year liquidating her private assets to create the secret fund just for me. Chelsea, my sweet girl, use this money to find a way to reclaim your dignity and demand the justice you deserve. The letter continued in a tone of fierce protection. Mom revealed that she had intentionally left decoy documents in the home office to distract Brooke, knowing that her daughter was too impatient to look past the surface of things. She had also documented every instance where Logan had tried to pressure her into changing her will, providing me with a roadmap of their deceit. They think you are weak because you choose kindness, but they have forgotten that I raised you to be a survivor. Mom had written in the final paragraph. Finding those words was like receiving a spiritual transfusion, replacing the coldness in my limbs with a burning, focused rage and a newfound sense of purpose. The realization that my own sister had planned my downfall while Mom was still breathing made the betrayal feel even more jagged, but it removed any lingering hesitation about fighting back. I looked at the $900,000 and the handwritten evidence of Brooke's true motives, feeling a genuine sense of power coursing through me. Brooke and Logan believed they had discarded me like worthless trash, leaving me to freeze while they celebrated their stolen victory in the house Mom built. They had no idea that Mom had reached out from beyond the grave to hand me the very weapon I needed to destroy their house of cards. I stood up, dusted the snow off my coat, and gripped the leather journals tightly, knowing exactly what I had to do next. I was no longer a victim wandering the streets. I was a woman on a mission to find a legal professional who could turn this secret into a public reckoning. 2 days after the terrifying snowstorm finally subsided, I stepped into the office of Harrison Thorne with a heavy folder of evidence that I knew would change everything. Harrison was my lawyer and a longtime friend of my parents, so he welcomed me with a look of immense relief that quickly turned into absolute horror as I began to describe the events of Christmas Eve. I watched his jaw tighten as I explained how Brooke had thrown me out like garbage, and how Logan had used physical force to ensure I couldn't stop them from stealing my inheritance. Harrison leaned back in his leather chair, his eyes scanning the $900,000 passbook and Mom's handwritten letter with the professional intensity of a hunter who had just found his praise trail. He told me that he had always suspected Brooke was ambitious, but he never imagined she would descend to the level of criminal activity against her own flesh and blood. Chelsea, you need to understand that the forgery of a signature on a legal inheritance document is a serious felony in the state of New Hampshire, and I will personally ensure that they pay a devastating price for this, Harrison stated with a cold, unwavering conviction. He immediately pulled up the public records for the property transfer in Concord, pointing out the digital timestamps that showed the documents were filed just hours after Mom's heart had stopped beating. Harrison explained that for a sale to go through that quickly, Brooke and Logan must have bypassed several mandatory waiting periods, which suggested a high level of premeditated fraud. His words acted as a balm to my wounded spirit, transforming my feelings of helplessness into a sharp legal resolve to see the truth brought into the light of day. We spent the next few hours meticulously cross-referencing Mom's personal records with the fraudulent deed, building a case that was becoming more airtight with every page we turned. As our investigation deepened, Harrison uncovered a disturbing connection between Logan and a corrupt notary public who had a history of questionable certifications in the New England area. We realized that Logan had used his professional network in the insurance industry to find someone willing to rubber stamp the forged signatures without ever seeing me in person. This wasn't just a simple mistake or a misunderstanding between siblings. It was a calculated conspiracy to bypass the legal protections Mom had put in place for me. Harrison tapped his pen against the desk, noting that the involvement of a third-party professional would escalate the charges from simple fraud to organized criminal conspiracy. I felt a chill run down my spine as I saw the sheer scale of the deception Logan had managed to orchestrate, but I also felt a surge of gratitude for the trail of breadcrumbs Mom had left behind. The most heartbreaking discovery came when we managed to access the archived backups of Mom's personal computer, which revealed the full extent of Brooke's role as the mastermind. We found a series of encrypted messages sent from Brooke to Logan, where she explicitly coached him on how to manipulate Mom's medication schedules to make her appear mentally incompetent. Brooke was the one who had researched the specific phrasing for the forged deed, and she was the one who had instructed Logan on exactly how much force to use if I ever tried to resist their plans. She is the strategist, Chelsea, and Logan is merely the blunt instrument she used to execute her vision of a life without you, Harrison observed as he printed out the incriminating transcripts. Seeing Brooke's cold, clinical words regarding my disposal was like being slapped in the face, confirming that she had viewed me as nothing more than a financial obstacle to be removed. The depths of Brooke's cruelty seemed to have no bottom as we further discovered a secret plan to cut off my health insurance and medical proxy rights if I didn't leave the house voluntarily. She had drafted a series of legal notices intended to portray me as an unstable individual who was unfit to manage my own affairs, all to ensure I could never challenge her in court. Brooke had even contacted local shelters to see if they had room for a disturbed relative, showing that she had anticipated my homelessness and had done nothing to prevent it. She wanted you to be so broken and discredited that no one would ever listen to your side of the story, Harrison said while shaking his head in disbelief at the sheer malice of the plan. Knowing that my own sister had spent months planning my total destruction made my heart harden into a diamond of pure, cold justice. Instead of filing a quiet lawsuit that Brooke could drag out for years with stolen money, Harrison suggested we set a public trap that would leave them no room for escape. Brooke was planning a lavish, grand launch party for her new real estate project at a high-end hotel in Concord, where she intended to showcase the sale of our family home as her first major success. Harrison and I decided that this event would be the perfect stage for our reckoning, as the presence of city officials and media would prevent Brooke from hiding behind her lies. We won't just take her to court, we will dismantle her reputation in front of the very people she is trying so hard to impress, Harrison plotted with a grim smile. I walked out of his office that afternoon with a heavy heart but a clear mind, ready to play the part of the defeated sister until the moment arrived to pull the rug out from under Brooke's feet. The day of the official property handover was supposed to be the crowning achievement of Brooke's life, a grand celebration held right in the expansive backyard of the home Mom had built. Brooke and Logan moved through the crowd of wealthy investors and city officials with an insufferable arrogance, both dressed in designer outfits that I knew were purchased with the blood money from the house deposit. Brooke held a glass of expensive champagne, her laughter ringing out across the lawn as she bragged about her visionary approach to real estate and her plans to demolish our outdated family legacy. Logan stood by her side, looking every bit the successful businessman, nodding along as they described the modern condominiums that would soon replace the trees Dad had planted 30 years ago. They were so blinded by their own reflected glory that they never noticed the black sedan pulling up to the curb or the steady, determined figure walking toward the center of the festivities. The music faltered and a confused murmur rippled through the guests as I stepped into the center of the lawn, flanked by Harrison Thorne and two uniformed officers from the Concord Police Department. Brooke's face underwent a terrifying transformation, shifting from triumphant joy to a pale, panicked mask as she realized I wasn't there to beg for mercy or cry over my lost home. I stopped just a few feet away from her, my voice clear and projecting with a strength that made the surrounding investors turn their heads in shocked curiosity. Did you truly believe you could sell off our parents' most sacred memories and my entire future using nothing but a fraudulent signature and a handful of lies, Brooke? I asked, my words cutting through the afternoon air like a gavel. She tried to stammer a response, attempting to play the role of the concerned sister dealing with an unstable relative, but the presence of the law by my side made her performance fall completely flat. Logan stepped forward, his face reddening with a mixture of anger and desperation as he tried to exert his usual brand of intimidation. Chelsea, you're making a scene and embarrassing yourself, so I suggest you leave before we have the officers remove you for trespassing, he hissed, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. Harrison didn't give him a second to breathe before he signaled to his assistant, who activated the large projection screen Brooke had set up for her marketing presentation. Instead of renderings of luxury apartments, a grainy but crystal clear video began to play, showing Logan sitting in a dimly lit coffee shop in Manchester. In the recording, Logan was clearly heard discussing the specific details of the forgery, with the corrupt notary explicitly mentioning that Brooke had instructed him to make sure the signature looked authentic enough to pass a quick glance. The guests gasped in unison as the audio played, capturing Brooke's voice over a speakerphone, confirming that the Chelsea problem would be handled once the deed was filed. That video is a fabrication, a desperate attempt by a jealous sibling to ruin my career. Brooke shrieked, her eyes darting around the crowd as she saw her potential investors physically backing away from her. But Harrison was relentless, stepping forward with a leather-bound folder and presenting a stack of certified documents to the lead officer. These are the forensic handwriting reports and the recovered digital logs from your own home office, proving that you orchestrated a conspiracy to defraud your sister of her legal birthright, Harrison announced for everyone to hear. Brooke's knees seemed to buckle as she turned toward Logan, her hands shaking so violently that she dropped her champagne glass, which shattered on the stone patio with a sound like a final exclamation point. In a desperate, pathetic attempt to save herself, she began screaming that it was all Logan's idea and that he had pressured her into signing the documents because of his gambling debts. Logan looked at her with a mixture of betrayal and pure hatred, realizing that the woman he had committed a felony for was now throwing him under the bus without a second thought. You were the one who drafted the plan, Brooke. You were the one who told me she deserved to be on the street because she was Mom's favorite. He yelled back, their public meltdown confirming their guilt more effectively than any court document ever could. The lead officer stepped forward, silencing their bitter exchange as he produced 2 sets of handcuffs and read them their rights in front of the very people they had tried so hard to impress. The sound of the metal ratcheting shut around Brooke's wrists was the most satisfying noise I had ever heard, a physical manifestation of the justice Mom had promised me in her final letter. As they were led away in disgrace, their designer clothes looking like mockery against the cold reality of the law, I realized that the reputation Brooke had spent a lifetime building was now nothing but ashes. The backyard fell into a stunned, uncomfortable silence as the guests began to disperse, leaving the grand launch to end in a whimper of scandal and police sirens. I stood on the patio looking at the house that was now legally protected by a court injunction and felt a profound sense of relief wash over me. I had walked into that den of lions with nothing but the truth and a lawyer by my side, and I had watched the wolves tear each other apart the moment things went wrong. Brooke and Logan had believed that their arrogance made them untouchable, but they had forgotten that the foundations of a house built on lies will always crumble under the weight of the truth. My sister had tried to discard me like trash, but in the end she was the one being hauled away, while I remained standing on the ground Mom had intended for me all along. 6 months after the final verdict was delivered, I stood in front of the old house in Concord and realized that true peace was finally beginning to settle in my soul. The legal system had moved with a swiftness that mirrored the clarity of the evidence we presented, and the consequences for Brooke and Logan were both severe and undeniably just. The court sentenced Brooke to 3 years in federal prison for being the primary mastermind behind the estate fraud and forgery, while Logan received a 2-year sentence for his direct role in executing the criminal conspiracy. Watching them being led away in shackles was not a moment of joy for me, but rather a somber realization that their greed had cost them everything, including their freedom and their humanity. They had tried to gamble with my life, but they ended up losing their own in a high-stakes game of deceit that they were never clever enough to win. Despite the desperate letters Brooke sent from her cell, begging for a sisterly visit or a second chance, I chose to sever all ties completely and irrevocably. I never replied to her pleas, nor did I ever set foot in that prison, because I knew that any reconciliation would only serve to reopen the wounds she had so callously inflicted. Our relationship did not end on the night she threw me out. It ended the moment she decided my life was an acceptable price to pay for her financial gain. I eventually sold the family home as the walls held too many echoes of Brooke's betrayal and the hollow laughter of people who no longer existed in my world. Moving on meant leaving the physical structure behind and carrying only the memories of Mom and Dad that weren't tainted by the scandal. I used the $900,000 and the proceeds from the house sale to establish a free public library and literacy center for children in the heart of Concord, naming it in honor of Mom to preserve her legacy of kindness. This center now serves as a sanctuary for the community, a place where stories are cherished and where the value of a person is never measured by their bank account. Transforming the remains of my family's tragedy into a beacon of hope for others has been the most fulfilling restoration project of my entire career. I realized that Mom's secret gift wasn't just about the money, it was about giving me the resources to build a life defined by my own values rather than someone else's malice. This journey has taught me that while money can blind the weak and corrupt the desperate, it has no power over a spirit fueled by integrity and resilience. I lost a sister, but I gained a profound understanding of my own strength and the unwavering protection of a mother's love that reached out from the past to save me. Justice may take time, and the road to reclaiming your dignity can be freezing and lonely, but standing firm in the truth is the only way to truly survive. I am now living a life of purpose surrounded by people who value me for who I am, and I have finally found the home I was always meant to have. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to my story of betrayal, survival, and the ultimate pursuit of justice against all odds. It was not easy to share these raw memories of family heartbreak, but I hope my journey offers a glimmer of hope to anyone currently facing their own storm of unfairness. Your support and presence here mean the world to me as I continue to build this new chapter of my life with honesty and grace. Before you go, I would truly appreciate it if you could share your thoughts in the comment section below about this difficult situation. Could you ever find it in your heart to forgive a sibling who plotted to leave you homeless? Or do you believe that some betrayals are simply too deep to ever bridge? I look forward to reading your diverse perspectives and engaging in a meaningful conversation about family loyalty and the true meaning of justice.